James, James, Rosenberg, Rosenberg.
Perfect, thank you. You may take a seat, please watch your step.
Thank you.
Please introduce yourself for the jury.
My name's Dr. James Rosenberg. I'm a licensed medical doctor in California. I specialize in psychiatry.
Can you please outline your professional education for us?
Yes, I studied philosophy and molecular biology at UC Berkeley. I then did a year of surgery research at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, including coronary laser angioplasty research. I attended medical school for 4 years at UCLA. I then did an internship in primarily specialties of surgery and cancer medicine, including neurosurgery and cardiothoracic surgery. I then did a 3-year residency at the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute in psychiatry, and I did a fellowship in forensic psychiatry at the Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland with a Dr. Philip Resnick.
Okay, and what licenses and board certifications do you hold?
So my license is to practice medicine in the state of California. I have a lifetime board certification in psychiatry. In 1996, I got my second board certification in forensic psychiatry, a subspecialty of psychiatry involving the legal system. That's every 10 years. I renewed it for another 10 years until 2016. And then due to a very bad experience I had in a criminal case, my wife and I decided I wouldn't renew it again and I would stop doing criminal work.
Okay, can you please briefly summarize your professional experience as a psychiatrist?
Yes, so after I completed my training and came back to my fellowship, I became assistant director of psychiatry at the West Los Angeles VA Medical Center and ran the locked psychiatric intensive care unit at UCLA Teaching Service and was there for a few years. I was a member of the UCLA Medical School faculty for 16 years. After I left the VA, because my forensic consultation practice started to get busy, I always continued to see patients at least one day a week unrelated to any legal matter. Most recently, it was 22 years at a nonprofit community mental health clinic in Van Nuys, providing psychiatric evaluation and treatment of homeless and low-income individuals. My forensic psychiatry practice, the first half of my career was primarily criminal cases, approximately 200 murders, mass murder, serial criminals, and other types of major crimes. The second half has been primarily civil litigation matters of brain injuries, catastrophic physical injuries with PTSD claims, and employment-related matters. I've consulted over the years to the United States Attorney in Washington, D.C. on organized crime in the Eastern District of New York, for the Medical Board, the Attorney General, and also for 8 years I was a consultant to the show Law and Order Special Victims Unit.
Thank you. Your Honor, I would like to show Exhibit 220 to the witness. Dr. Rosenberg, it's Exhibit 220 in the blue binder.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm at 220.
Are you familiar with this document?
Yes, this looks like the first page of my resume or curriculum vitae.
And can you please flip through it and let me know if that's a true, correct copy of your CV?
Yes, this is the most current version, last updated February 2023.
Thank you. Your Honor, defendant moves to admit Exhibit 220 in evidence.
Objection, Your Honor. I object to that at this point.
Based on what?
Foundation.
Hold on.
Have you been retained as an expert on behalf of the defendant Cardi B in this case?
That's my understanding.
And what is it that you were asked to do?
I was asked to conduct a psychiatric evaluation of Ms. Ellis's emotional injury claims related to the incident on February 24th, 2018.
Have you served as a retained expert in previous cases?
Yes, both criminal and civil matters, probably over my career, maybe 1,500 times.
Experts are paid for their time. What is your rate that you charge for the time that you spent working on this case?
So I charge, my base rate is $550 an hour, which is for reviewing records, my face-to-face examination of Ms. Ellis, scoring the psychological testing, and writing a report. My rate for testimony in deposition, which was taken in this case, or trial like today, is $800 an hour, and there's in 4-hour blocks.
Does your fee depend in any way on whether your opinion is favorable to Cardi B?
No, that's never been the case. And for example, I've never worked on the lien, which does involve that type of interest from my non-attorney standpoint.
Do you recall approximately how long you've been engaged on this matter?
I believe it's been since early 2023.
Okay, and how much have you charged in this matter over those 2.5 roughly years?
Well, for reviewing the records, which I've had to re-review, and additional records, examination, the psych testing, my report, preparing for deposition with plaintiff's counsel, I think I've thus far charged something a little over $30,000. Okay.
And I believe you testified that you conducted a psychiatric evaluation of the plaintiff as part of your duties in this case. Is that correct?
Yes. So the psychiatric evaluation is, to me, a broader term that consists of the triad of reviewing records, conducting a face-to-face examination, and scoring and utilizing the psychological testing that was administered during that examination. So it's a matter of integrating and correlating and weighing the information from those three sources.
And can you please, in just a little more detail, explain what happened during that evaluation in this case?
Certainly. So I believe it was in July, maybe around July 21st, 2023. So it took about, I would say, roughly 6 hours. The entire examination was audio recorded. And the first half of the examination was the administration of the psychological testing, where using gold standard psychological tests, I provided them to Ms. Ellis. I was there with her the entire time and made sure she understood the instructions, and then she filled out the answering sheets, circles or bubble and answer sheets as she went along. The second half of the day was the interview. And in accordance with generally accepted principles, whether it's a patient care or clinical setting or forensic setting like this, the interview involves a wide variety of background areas in order to establish a baseline, some of these risk and resilience factors for developing a psychiatric disorder. So it includes, for example, a brief developmental history, education growing up, employment, social marital relationships, medications, general medical history, substance use history, if any, whether there are any family history of any psychiatric or medical conditions that are relevant and carry a genetic risk for Ms. Ellis, as well as legal issues like workers' comp claims, so a variety of background areas. And then to establish that baseline in detail, what Ms. Ellis was like, let's say in the month or so before the incident in this case, then a brief discussion of that incident, and then in detail tracing the onset and course of her reported emotional and other symptoms and how that's affected her, and in the context of also correlating that with her real-life day-to-day function and any health care that she sought out and received.
Okay, and based on that examination, did you reach any conclusions with respect to whether the plaintiff suffered a mental or emotional injury as a result of her encounter with Cardi B?
Yes, I did reach an opinion, as with all my opinions, I reached an opinion with reasonable medical probability in that regard.
Thank you, and what was that opinion?
My opinion is that there is no significant evidence that Ms. Ellis sustained an emotional injury at any point in time in this case, from the time of the incident to present, with the understanding that an emotional injury, from my standpoint, consists of the onset of one or more psychiatric diagnoses in accordance with the American Psychiatric Association's guidelines or criteria, or the substantial worsening if there was a pre-existing disorder, and that in my opinion, Ms. Ellis has never qualified for that in this case.
Thank you. I believe you testified that one of the parts of your examination was psychological testing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you please briefly explain what those tests were?
Yes, so again, what's very important is first the choice of tests. I use gold standard tests that are well validated scientifically and recognized as appropriate tests for this context. So the purpose of the test is that first they have validity scales that look at how somebody's approaching taking the test and what information that says generally about how the individual may be approaching reporting an emotional injury claim, as well as on the test specifically. They then include a variety of clinical scales: anxiety, depression, PTSD, physical symptoms, substance use, cognitive symptoms, meaning things like memory, attention, concentration, personality, psychosis, a variety of factors like that.
And can you please identify what tests are administered?
Yes, so I administered the MMPI-3. It was either the MMPI-3 or the MMPI-2-RF. Those are the current ultimate gold standard tests. You have to pass that test. For example, to fly a passenger jet, to be in the Secret Service, you have to pass that, or the other test I gave, for example, to become a law enforcement officer in California. So I gave the MMPI-2-RF or the MMPI-3. I gave the only other gold standard test of that type, the Personality Assessment Inventory, or PAI. And then something that's very secondary is I gave a brief screening cognitive test, a simple 10-minute test used in primary care that looks at things like attention, memory, concentration.
And can you please summarize for the jury what the process of taking the MMPI-2 or 3 test looks like?
Sure. So, I first ask if the individual is familiar with it, and then that she can see the answer sheet in the booklet, have her read the formal instructions at the beginning of the test booklet and tell me that she understands them. And then it's a matter of answering about 335 questions where you bubble in on a separate answer sheet, true or false, for those questions. And then I take the results of that and I use the test publisher's official scoring software, which I have on a laptop computer, input those answers, and then generate a statistical report based upon her answers that provides a variety of scales and scores, and then narrative text, meaning it provides a text description of what individuals like these scores tend to look like, although it doesn't talk specifically about Ms. Ellis. And you would never want to make an opinion about somebody based on just the test. Again, it's a matter of correlating them with your overall evaluation, with the interview and the record review.
Thank you. Your Honor, I'd like to show Trial Exhibit 229 to the witness.
Objection, hearsay.
You don't want to publish it at this point?
Not at this point.
Oh, okay. I thought I had no objection to showing it. Just publish it.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you please turn in the blue binder to Exhibit 229?
Okay, I'm at 229. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you familiar with this document?
Yes. So this is the report of the MMPI-2 psychological test that I administered to Ms. Ellis on July 21st, 2023, and which I provided along with other documents to opposing counsel before my deposition.
And does this document refresh your recollection as to which version of the MMPI-2 test you conducted in Ms. Ellis' case?
Yes, I gave the MMPI-2. That and the MMPI-3 are the most recent and, again, the gold standard tests worldwide in this kind of a context.
Thank you. And that report that you have in front of you, did you create that document yourself?
Well, I created it in the sense that I inputted her answers into the test publisher software on my laptop. I then double-checked the answer through a process that's provided by the software. And then I had the software generate this report, again using statistical algorithm that is intrinsic to the software. I don't personally score any of the scales. I don't personally write out any of the text interpretation that's in it. My job is then, how do I use that information once it's available in an overall assessment?
And is it fair to say that you used this report as an analytical tool in reaching your conclusions with respect to Ms. Ellis?
Yes, again, considering all of the information available to me from the records, the exam, the testing, I utilized inductive medical reasoning, a best fit logical reasoning, the same reasoning I would use if I was in an emergency room, if I was a surgeon or I was a radiologist.
Do you use this software and the reports that are generated from it regularly in your psychological evaluations?
Yes, I've used these tests several hundreds of times. I have the highest user rating qualification from both test publishers.
Okay, and do you recall when this particular report was generated?
My best recollection is I generated it, shortly after the examination had been completed, but I just apologize, I don't recall a specific date.
Okay, thank you. Defendant moves to admit Exhibit 229 into evidence.
Section hearsay.
Overruled. Submitted.
Your Honor, may I publish page 2 of Exhibit 229?
Right.
All right, and Dr. Rosenberg, you can see at the top there, I suppose you could look at the binder as well.
If you turn your screen on, the top left button on the top left side, it should be on there.
Thank you, Your Honor. That's much better.
All right.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, yes, sir. I can see it now. I wasn't able to see that.
Thank you. If you look at the top of the page, it says validity scales. Can you please explain what that means?
Yes. So these are the most important scales of their type for this and the MMPI-3 of any test in the world, any psychological test. The validity scales look at how somebody is approaching the test. The first two scales, VRIN and TRIN, variable and true response indicator, look at whether somebody understood the test questions and responded to them in a consistent fashion. So those first have to be valid before you can go on to interpret the rest of the test. The remainder of the validity scales, the vast majority of them, look at their F scales because they look at infrequent responses. These scales become more and more elevated if an individual endorses or answers questions endorsing symptoms that are infrequent, meaning that even somebody who actually had that mental disorder would not actually endorse them. And these scales are scored against a large statistical population, cross-section population of the United States. And then the last couple scales, the L scale, looks at a different type of potential manipulation, portraying yourself in an overly positive or virtuous light. And then the last one is just a correction to that.
Thank you. And what do Ms. Ellis's test results in this case show you? And I'm sorry, specifically with respect to the validity scales.
Yeah, so looking at these, it's more fun to do it from memory, but looking at these scales, they demonstrate that when Ms. Ellis took this test, that she generated scale elevations in the range that only reasonably could be interpreted as either severe symptom exaggeration or symptom fabrication. From a psychiatric standpoint, obviously I'm not giving a factual opinion. So if we look at F, the third one over with a T-score of 83, so these are compared against a normal bell curve of statistical scores where a T-score of 50 is in the middle. And every time you go out 10, you're going out another standard deviation. So at a T-score of 83, the F scale that looks at things like anxiety, depression, PTSD, she generated a score more than 3 standard deviations above the norm. And statistically, only 48 people out of 100,000 would actually generate that score, even if they really had the condition. If we then look at the other scales thereafter, the FS scale, S is for somatic, meaning physical symptoms. The FBS, which is the fake bad scale or symptom validity scale, and the RBS scale, those look at physical health symptoms and they look at cognitive symptoms like attention, concentration, primarily if you're evaluating a brain injury claim. And so on those scales, with the understanding that, as I'll discuss, Ms. Ellis has not sought out any type of, from my review of the Kaiser records in my audio recorded interview, any type of physical health problem whatsoever, and certainly hasn't had a brain injury. These elevations are extraordinarily high. The FBS, or fake bad scale elevation, of a T-score of 102 at 5 standard deviations above the norm, only 2 individuals out of 1 billion would actually have that score if he or she had the actual disorder. So these are extremely high. They're far beyond the range of somebody who could just be distressed and is trying to emphasize how distressed she is, or so-called cry for help. These are in the range of elevation that no individual, even with the conditions, would reasonably have at that statistical elevation, putting aside that she doesn't even claim those types of symptoms in the first place.
Thank you. What types of symptoms would that be?
So for the FS, to have an elevation on F sub S, which is somatic or physical, especially a significant elevation, you would have to have a serious physical health condition. Let's say you have cancer, or you recently had a heart attack, or you're in heart failure, or you have uncontrolled diabetes, things like that. FBS is particularly sensitive to symptom fabrication or exaggeration in individuals who've had traumatic brain injuries. But again, even if you had a severe disabling traumatic brain injury and you were in a rehabilitation facility, your elevation would be maybe a T-score of 70, 75. Again, at 102, where it's 2 people in a billion, no individual who even had a brain injury would reasonably endorse that score. Where again, they get elevated the more and more you endorse symptoms that no person who actually has the condition would actually report those symptoms. And then RBS is cognitive. So again, it looks at things like attention, memory, and concentration. And again, hers is elevated in the range of 4 standard deviations. So, it would be well over 100 million to 1 that she would actually have those symptoms.
Thank you. Can you please turn to page 10 of the report?
Of this psych testing report?
Yes. Towards the bottom, you see is written diagnostic considerations.
Yes.
Can you please explain what that section is saying here?
Yes, so again, the report doesn't talk about Ms. Ellis specifically. It talks about, at a statistical level, individuals who have these scales and scores tend to look like this. And the diagnoses that are suggested are rank ordered. They're in the priority of how likely they are. And so the first diagnosis listed is malingering of somatic and or cognitive symptoms primarily generated by the elevation of the F sub S, the fake bad scale, and the RBS. And so, and malingering refers to the intentional gross exaggeration or otherwise fabrication or manipulation of symptoms for secondary gain in the field of psychiatry, and is actually in accordance with the American Psychiatric Association's published guidelines.
And again, this section of the report, like everything else, this was generated as a result of the test publisher software. Is that correct?
Yes, the test publisher software, the statistical scoring, which involves hundreds of thousands of individuals, and then detailed mathematical statistical algorithms that are used to score this test and prepare this report.
You testified earlier that there were other psychological tests that you administered. Are the results of those tests similar with respect to symptom exaggeration or fabrication?
Well, I would say yes and no. The other test, the personality assessment inventory, does not have as sensitive of validity scales to detect exaggeration or other manipulation, though it does show some evidence of that. But when we look at the clinical scales on the personality assessment inventory, Ms. Ellis generated such huge elevations for scales like anxiety, physical symptoms, PTSD, depression, again, several deviations above the norm, that make no reasonable sense unless somebody was actually, for example, so ill that she required inpatient psychiatric care on medications, was critically ill or terminally ill with physical health conditions. The other inconsistency is that on the MMPI-2RF, she scored, accepting her symptoms at face value, she scored very high on symptoms for paranoid thinking at the level of somebody with a paranoid psychotic disorder like schizophrenia. And that was not seen on the PAI. So that would be an inconsistency between them. But it also would be another example of symptom endorsement that makes no reasonable sense except for intentional gross fabrication or outright fabrication of symptoms in this case. At that level of paranoid thinking, again, would be like a uncontrolled schizophrenia requiring acute inpatient care on medication. But by the same token, taking it at face value, it is, from my standpoint, of relevance to the trier of fact in evaluating somebody with that degree of paranoia and suspiciousness, how that individual reacts to or responds in neutral situations, social situations, potential arguments.
You mentioned a high paranoid thinking score. I believe that's correct.
I'm sorry, so what did you say?
Did you mention a high paranoid thinking score? Is that how you phrased it?
Yes, on the three key scales of the MMPI-2 for paranoid thinking, again, typically seen in something like schizophrenia, she had significant elevations on those scales, all three, again, in the range which the we see here in the text report, how the report interprets it, at the level of somebody who's a paranoid psychotic with delusions, not just somebody who feels a little stressed or like somebody's looking over her shoulder.
And as a professional and a psychiatrist, how would you interpret that score in this case?
So again, I think there are only two reasonable ways to interpret it. One would be that it's another common manifestation in how somebody in an emotional injury case produces either gross exaggeration or outright fabrication of symptoms in an attempt to look injured. The alternative is that part of somebody's baseline where in day-to-day interactions she interprets normal or neutral interactions as a personal attack. The only other reasonable alternative, taking at face value, would be she actually has a psychotic mental disorder like paranoid schizophrenia with things like hallucinations, believing that there's a plot to have her killed, satellites are watching her, her phone is bugged, things of that sort.
And based on the other elements of your examination, did you make a conclusion as to which one of those would be true here?
Well, I think reasonably from a psychiatric standpoint, given all the other information available to me, the reasonable interpretation is that it's another example of severe symptom manipulation, exaggeration, or fabrication. But again, it also has to be considered, again, from a factual standpoint for the trier of fact. Does it demonstrate paranoid thinking that can affect how somebody reacts in a situation or a disagreement?
But to be clear, are you diagnosing Ms. Ellis with, for example, schizophrenia?
No, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Why not?
Objection, ask that answer.
Well, because in schizophrenia, and obviously there's a spectrum, there are individuals who are very well controlled on medication. I know I've had schizophrenic patients, who are like run corporations and do very well, but the vast majority tend to have very severe and chronic courses, often homeless in mental institutions. And so, but with these levels of scores, if you actually had schizophrenia, you would function at a very low level. You wouldn't be able to maintain reasonable family relationships. You wouldn't be able to hold a job. You wouldn't be able to function in major life activities. And again, you would require psychiatric hospitalization and antipsychotic medication.
Did you diagnose Ms. Ellis with any psychiatric conditions?
No, again, since I equate, for a case like this, emotional injury with have you developed one or more psychiatric disorders as a result of your allegations of the incident with Cardi B, I have no diagnoses for her because she has sustained no emotional injury.
Okay, and apart from the test results, are there any other factors on which you base your conclusion that plaintiff hasn't suffered any mental or emotional injury?
Yes.
What are those?
So the first factor is that, again, if I accept Ms. Ellis's report or allegations of what happened that day in that incident, reasonably from a psychiatric standpoint, that would be a stressful or upsetting situation. You might be mad or angry for a day. You might lose some sleep over it. It might be in the back of your mind for a few days. But reasonably, people don't develop psychiatric disorders like an anxiety disorder, depression, from an argument or an unpleasant interaction like that on a single basis. That just makes no reasonable sense. And as we'll discuss, makes even less sense in Ms. Ellis's case because it turns out, although she didn't share them with me when I asked, she's had multiple other traumas in her life, and according to her, those didn't cause emotional problems, so she obviously must have great resilience, and it would make no sense that this much more minor thing somehow would, and most people wouldn't. The other reason is that, well, I have a few reasons, but I promise I'll stop talking soon. Another reason it's important to understand that this doesn't constitute a trauma. Again, accepting Ms. Ellis's report of what happened at face value, it doesn't constitute a trauma. It would be a stressor to some degree on an interpersonal basis, but under the American Psychiatric Association standards for what constitutes a trauma, for example, to be able to develop PTSD, this does not meet that. It has to be something like life-threatening accident, illness, witness to violence. So, for example, physical or sexual abuse growing up, kidnapping, sexual assault, military combat. These things are traumas, and they can lead to PTSD. An argument or an unpleasant interpersonal interaction isn't a trauma and can't lead to PTSD. And that's particularly important for us since some of Ms. Ellis's most dramatic scores on the psych testing have been profound elevations of PTSD scales, again, in a range where no individual who actually had PTSD would reasonably generate those scores.
Are there any other factors?
Yes, so another important factor is, again, in accordance with the published, generally accepted guidelines of the American Psychiatric Association in our diagnostic manual, whenever there is a psychiatrist or psychologist is doing an evaluation in a legal context, where financial gain or some other type of secondary gain is at stake, you always have to consider and rule out the risk of intentional manipulation for financial gain. And in that context, in this case, Ms. Ellis has demonstrated a significant pattern of inconsistencies and other symptom validity issues. For example, in my audio-recorded examination, again, there's an audio-recorded record, she told me, with the exception of a couple sessions of family therapy when she was 12 because her sister had been sexually assaulted by a neighbor, she could not recall a single trauma in her entire life growing up. Couldn't remember a single one in response to my detailed questioning. Whereas, for example, in her deposition, she reported that she was a victim growing up of domestic violence in the home, gang violence, other violence. Schoolmates were shot and killed. She was physically mugged in high school. Her car was broken into several times. None of those were reported to me. So those represent an important mismatch in a legal case where an individual potentially tries to make everything about the incident that can be compensable in a lawsuit. Another example along the same lines is in my audio-recorded exam, she told me that all of her emotional problems from the day of the incident, in this case, February 2018 to present, have been entirely due to what happened with Cardi B and absolutely nothing else. And she couldn't identify any other stressors in recent years that could be relevant. Whereas, again, in her deposition testimony, the same year, January 2018, her mother was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. Later in the year, her mother had radiation therapy for cancer.
Objection right to privacy of the mother.
If you want to describe the issues more generically.
My apologies, Your Honor.
Sure.
And the same year, one of her friends committed suicide. And again, none of those things were shared with me. So that would be another example. I do have a couple more.
Setting aside that mismatch that you're discussing, are there any other general topics, general factors on which you base your conclusion?
Yes. So another factor that I have to consider as a psychiatrist and medical doctor is there a mismatch across sources of information, considering the records I've reviewed, the psych testing I did, the interview. So another factor, which is very important, is to correlate somebody's subjective, meaning what she reports, emotional injury claims of injury, with real-life day-to-day function as a more objective measure. So in this case, if I accepted Ms. Ellis's reports at face value, particularly with the psych testing, she would have profound, off-the-charts PTSD, profound disabling depression, anxiety, profound disabling physical health conditions. Whereas when I compare that to her real-life function, she's had intact relationships with her, loving relationships with her family, which would not be reasonable in the context, particularly of profound PTSD. That she's, in a few months after the altercation and continuing to the present, she's had a job that not only has been higher paying for her, but has been more demanding, requires top, excellent interpersonal skills, how to deal with people, troubled youths, and emotional resilience, and has, per her deposition, performed it well. Again, total mismatch. She also reported to me that since the incident, she's traveled to Hawaii, Las Vegas, Mexico, though she couldn't remember, supposedly, that if she had gone to other places or how many times. And again, even if you look in the psych testing report that was generated, particularly with severe PTSD, you don't want to leave your house, you don't want to interact with people, you withdraw from your family, the future looks bleak to you, you don't have a job. These things are completely contrary.
Thank you. No further questions.